Welcome to a CoachFives conversation. I'm Alf Gregum, co-founder of CoachFives and also the host of the Coach Craft podcast. And today we're talking about something that sits at the heart of what CoachFives is built around: individual player feedback. Not team talks, not halftime instructions, but the one-on-one personal kind of feedback that actually helps a young player understand where they are and where they're going. Joining me today are two people who think very deeply about this. Tommy Geis is a leader in the youth grassroots soccer community. He's the technical director and a coach educator at Massachusetts Youth Soccer, the membership association dedicated to the development of youth soccer players, coaches, and referees across the Commonwealth here in Massachusetts. He's been with Mass Youth Soccer since 2010. He holds a U.S. Soccer A license, among a number of other coaching credentials. Tommy, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to it.
And Mike Smith. Mike has spent his career developing young soccer players and the coaches who work with them. And he served for 15 years as a network development lead for Curver Coaching across Europe and Latin America. And he is the founder of Big Idea Sports, a consultancy that's focused on communication and leadership in sports and business. And he's also the co-founder, along with me, of CoachFives. And he's the real brain behind the skill ladder framework that drives the app. It's true, Mike. You are. So welcome, Mike.
I think there's many brains behind this, to be honest. But yes, but thank you for that. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, great to have you here. Between Mike and Tommy, they both bring the philosophy and the practice. So perspective that is theoretical and grounded in youth development research, but also practical and based on the many, many years of experience out on the playing field, working with kids and coaches. So I hope you find this conversation as interesting as I know I will. So let's get started. Great. Mike, I'm going to start with you. In your work with CoachFives, you frame the challenge facing youth soccer as a need to evolve from a sink or swim model to support and thrive. What do you mean by that exactly? And why does it matter, particularly at the younger ages?
Yeah. Well, this is from my experience, over the years, seeing youth teams play in probably 20, 30 different countries. But there's kind of one common thing that I think the sport experience for many young players is about kind of being thrown into the deep end. The challenge is difficult. There's the pressure. There's the parents on the sideline, and you make your own way through it. That's the model. It's kind of sink or swim. And the better players rise to the top and they go on. And I think it's an approach really that has been designed around, finding the next generation of top level players. So that's what we're trying to do. It is separating the wheat from the chaff and see who goes on. But I think the long-term result of that is a lot of kids, the majority of kids who are not the natural quick talent, they quickly conclude that the sports is not for me. They drop out at an earlier age and they don't come back. And that has a lot of impacts later in life, in terms of health, in terms of you personally, in terms of socially as well. Because sport can be such a powerful medium for all those things. So to support and thrive, I think, is a coaching mentality or kind of a duty, if you like, that focuses on actively supporting every player on their development journey. And that, yes, it includes the challenge, the effort, the learning, the match day craziness or whatever. That's competitive youth sports. It's part of the excitement. It's part of the beauty, it's part of the benefit. So it's about creating a positive relationship that the coach builds with every player, that player-coach connection. And it's about, more kids feeling good about their sport. It's about more kids coming back. It's about more kids carrying on in some way in the future. And the last thing I'll say, I think that this model, Support and Thrive, is evolving because parents are starting to want that more. And there's nothing that can convince a parent that the program is good for their kids if a kid comes home and says, the coach had a word with me today. He said, well done about this. You don't have to talk to the parent, educate the parent. The player will educate the parent depending on the relationship between the coach and the player. So I think that's Support and Thrive is, and that's the work we're doing around CoachFives. That's the orientation.
Great. Tommy, want to put the question to you, and let's talk a little bit more about the youth soccer. We're talking soccer. This could be any youth sport, but let's talk about the youth coach a little bit. How important is the coach in creating a positive experience for a young player, an experience that's more about this support and thrive framing that Mike mentioned, and especially at the grassroots level? So there's a view that says the game itself is the teacher, but what's your take on the role of the coach in that context?
Well, children tend to be very eager to learn and excited about exploring things and trying to find solutions on their own. The coach is so incredibly important in creating that environment, creating that opportunity where children can discover the solutions. If the coach knows how to nudge them, just give them enough information to nudge them in the right direction and then let them come up with the solutions on their own. So the coach has a very important role in being that guide to help the players achieve what they hopefully want to get out of the game, not necessarily what the coach wants them to get out of the game, but helping the child achieve what they want to get from the game, whatever level that happens to be.
Yeah, and you talk about this, this idea of the game being the teacher, and then you alluded to it just a little bit in what you just said about this is the kids' game, right? This is this is not this is youth sports. This is not an experience designed for the coach. But how does a coach support that and kind of keep that as the kids' game? How do we continue to make this the kids' game?
Well, the game can be the greatest teacher if it's delivered the right way from the coach, if the coach can create the right environment. At times, the game can be very confusing, and it's the coach's role to help guide the player, just try to simplify the game based on what their age or what their stage of soccer happens to be so that they can explore that. I've heard so many times that coaches sit on the sideline and will give a dissertation as to what soccer looks like from an adult viewpoint, and then they're shocked when the children can't do it. So it's important to understand
Mm.
who are the children that are in front of us, what part of the game makes sense to them, and what are the little nuggets of information that can help them take a game situation that might be complex and put it into simpler terms.
Great. And Mike, kind of back over to you. So in the Coach Fives approach, we draw a clear
Mm.
distinction between team feedback and individual feedback, right? So we're talking about how we're communicating and talking to the players on a team here. But team feedback and individual feedback, what's the difference? And why does that distinction matter so much as a young player develops?
Yeah. I think as Tommy said, it's the coach's role is all about creating this environment, to thrive, this environment where players take the initiative, players learn. And in the times of chaos or misunderstanding or their emotion is down, the coach has an important role. I like that clarity and guide rather than the word coach is a funny word. A lot of people misunderstand that and it's push, push, push. You see that a lot in kind of the team feedback from the sidelines during the game, and where a lot of coaches just are trying to tactically guide everything on the field. And so there's an environment there that the players are, playing so fast, they don't really have, but they've got half an ear on the coach. And that just detracts. So that's more in the environment. I think Tommy's right. How you set up that environment for kids to thrive is really, really, really important. In terms of the team versus the individual, I think most coaches think of feedback on a team basis. So they understand kind of the pregame talk, pep them up, getting them ready, getting them going. They understand the halftime. Maybe there's a couple of things we're not doing well. We've got to mark this player a bit more because he's their key striker. We've got to be tighter, little things like that. And then the after the game, the congratulations or the commiseration, and then we move on. I think coaches get that, and I think most coaches do that reasonably well, except for the sideline coaching. But I think there's from our experience, and actually from my experience when I was a junior coach, there's very little individual feedback because teams are made up of individuals. And individuals, particularly young players, they want and they need that individual feedback if it's delivered in the right way, the right time, the right place. Those words of a coach matter a lot, but they can only be taken in on an individual basis. So, there's a lot of research on this, obviously in sports science, sports psychology. And I was reading this week, and there were 3 conclusions about what individual feedback does that team feedback doesn't. And the first one, it turns a player from being invisible into visible and valued, because a lot of players feel invisible. They're not sure what they did well in the game. We won or we lost, somebody scored a goal. But that invisibility is what can make players just disappear from the game. Being visible, being recognized is really important for any kid. The second part is from being a bit lost. I think, Tommy, you touched on this. The game is the game. From feeling a bit lost to, I get it. And that little nudge, as you say, helps them get it, because it's not always the simplest thing to do. Then it's up to them to take that information and use that. And the last one was this movement from kind of being doubtful and isolated, because there's a lot of pressure on each player to do well, to being thought of as being capable and then motivated to do more. So this sense of kind of being fearless, of having courage, but often that helps that it takes that little nudge to get there with kids. Some are naturals, 80% are not naturals, and they can use that. I think what Tommy said, that little nudge. So I think, yes, carving out those 2 to 3 minute moments as individuals is different to the team. It has a different impact, and it's really important for young players.
Yeah, Tommy, you work with coaches across the state, and you are educating coaches in the classroom, out on the pitch, and you're observing coaches. But just picking up on what Mike said, what do you see around that as well? This idea of the team feedback, which I think you see on game day, certainly you see on the training ground, but then this other piece of feedback, the opportunity that a coach has to connect with individual players. How do you see that, and kind of what do you see as you look around the state as well?
A lot of what you see around the soccer environment is just the ability to listen. When the coaches come in at the pregame or at the halftime or at the postgame, it might be 90% the coach talking and 10% the children giving feedback, one-word answers, quick responses. But it's helpful that the coaches can go a little bit deeper and really get an understanding of what the player was experiencing, and then help them from that point. It gets to a point where at times coaches will ask questions to the players almost to check a box. They'll ask them a yes or no question, and the child will answer yes. And then the coach will go on a 2-minute reflection on just confirming that whatever they want to tell them is okay. It's more important that the coach grasp that feeling of what the child was experiencing, what they saw, what they felt, what they understood, and now redirecting your feedback to help them solve whatever problem happens to be in front of them. It's not an easy thing to do, because we think we're listening and we think we're embracing the children, but it's also taking that step forward. And sometimes that changes everything that you had in your notes, or everything that you wanted to say now gets thrown out because the answer to your question was completely different than what you anticipated. So now you have to meet the child on their situation.
Yeah, such an interesting observation. This idea around, a coach. We talk a lot about being prepared when you step out on the training pitch with players and having a plan. What we're talking about here is it's a little more interactive. I'd say a little more unpredictable as well. Like, as one of the roles of the coach, I like to say, is to really be able to tune into your players and observe them. But then also in these moments of conversation, like genuine exchange conversation with a player, you're going to hear things about how the player is experiencing the game that you, as a coach, are probably not anticipating or expecting. And this idea of being able to take that and incorporate it into what you're doing on the pitch with that individual child or with the team more broadly is super, super important as a child. But I think you don't know what you're going to uncover when you
Yeah.
really do get down to having those one-on-one conversations with players.
It may be, Tommy, I don't know your experience. It can be also from coaches that, particularly beginner coaches, they're kind of reluctant, not afraid, maybe it's the wrong word, but to get in some of those conversations because the player then says, I need help in this, and the coach doesn't quite know how to solve that. You know, beginner coach may not have that depth of experience in the game. So how do we help kind of that beginner coach in kind of what would you guide them in they have a question, the question brings another question, then I don't have the answer, where do I go from there?
Well, many times it is when you're addressing the group. And I tried this once with one of my assistant coaches in the past. And they asked me, they said, how do you conduct halftime? So at halftime came about, and I looked at the players and I gave them something specific that I observed of something that wasn't working well. For example, the opponent was breaking through our midfield line 10 times out of 14 attempts. So when we start the discussion, then I bring the players together. I said, all right, let's get our midfielders together. Let's get our defenders together. Let's get our forwards together. Said, so tell me what you saw in the breakdown as to why they're getting through those areas of the field. I'll give you a minute. So the players started talking, and after a minute, they shared their ideas. And after they shared, I said, okay, you have another minute, solve it. How are we going to fix this? And that means midfielders, you have to talk to the defenders. Midfielders, you have to talk to the forwards.
Yeah.
Goalkeeper, you have to talk to the defenders. And they came back. I said, after a minute, I said, all right, so what can I expect to see differently when we step back out on the field in the second half? What can we see from our defenders?
Yeah.
What can we see from our midfielders? What can we see from our goalkeeper? What can we see from our forwards? And they came back with a solution for me. So sometimes you get into a situation where if you're not quite sure on where to go from there, let the players solve it with each other and then see if they could see if they can now do something, because if they could come up with a solution, all we have to do is sit back and observe it.
Yeah.
Now, that is not a one size fits all for every single situation, but sometimes it's a very positive situation that you're giving ownership of the game back to the kids.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's good.
Tommy, in some ways, you started to touch on what I was going to ask you next. You've spoken about this just a little bit just now, but also when we spoke a few months ago on the CoachCraft podcast. You talk a lot about the importance of a coach coming in at the level of the player rather than approaching them as, this all-knowing coach who has all the answers, right? Say a little bit more. I think the example you just gave is perhaps even one example of this, but can you say a little bit more about what that looks like in practice and like how this changing of that dynamic between player and coach and empowering the players more, how that plays out and why that's so important?
Well, no, as coaches, is often it's the art of asking a good question. So it does take practice and it does take trial and error, but asking the players questions that require thought. So asking a can you question or did you question that the player can guess and either be yes or no, but doesn't really require a lot of thought, doesn't help the player, doesn't move the needle. If you ask when or how or why something's happening or who might help you in that situation, now the player has to pause and think for a minute and tell you where they're, what they see and what they understand. Now, as the coach, I have to listen to that and treat it like they've just they've identified the situation. Now let's help them come up to a solution. For example, Alf, if you're the dribbler on the team who's getting very frustrated because he's losing the ball, I might ask you what you need to be more successful in that environment. Who could help you? Which players on the field could help you? So now the discussion is, if we could get Mike to move when you have the ball to help you, then that should solve the problem with you. But that also is going to help Mike, because if now Mike moves into that situation, now he knows if he's never getting the ball from Alf, it's a different situation that now we have to solve. So it holds a little bit of accountability to the players, but it also helps them be a part of creating the solution to solve the problem that they're experiencing.
Yeah, this is
Yeah,
a
that's
little
good.
bit of around what I'm hearing, Tommy, is this is kind of the art of how to have a good conversation with players. How to ask constructive prompts, not to necessarily ask a question just trying to get an answer back that you want to hear, but actually asking those why questions, or asking the players to imagine what a solution might be is really interesting. But that's not something that comes easily, particularly to someone who hasn't done a lot of coaching, right? Like, this is a part of the craft that requires just time on the pitch with players, and kind of learning to find your own voice in these conversations, and then
Mm.
helping the players and you have them. So, but yeah, I mean, Mike, how do you kind of experience that, or look at that?
Yeah, I think it's the word the word conversation, isn't it? We use the word feedback a lot because it's understood.
Mm.
You want to give some support to a player if you see something where they could improve and move them towards that. But the conversation word is the right one, because that's two way. Often feedback tends to be one way. That's how a lot of coaches support that or understand that. Um, but I think then, yeah. So as we went on the project with CoachFives to help coaches, to support coaches in the area of having better conversations and conversations that really make a difference, spirit building, skill building conversations, is I think the first part is just helping, and Tommy, you touched on this, of this idea that observation, that's a word that you use, I think, quite a lot, that's where it starts. And in my experience with coaches is observation is not really something they recognize as a coaching skill. Drills and games, getting the cones out, setting up the mini goals, all the things you talked about during the game, being aware of the little advice I can give, all those things. But actually stepping back a little bit and observing is quite a difficult thing for coaches to do. That the kind of being silent is difficult for coaches to do, but that's kind of an essential and really valuable tool. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just go back and again explain that. I want to build on kind of what we're doing in that, but about observation, why it's so difficult for coaches in a way. If you say, be quiet for 10 minutes and let's watch and let's figure out what we want to watch for. That's a tough one.
Well, a lot of it is the perception that we live in a society that people think the loudest coach is the best coach, the most vocal coach.
Yeah.
Parents will walk off the field and said, "Wow, did you hear how much that coach was coaching?" But they tend to it's not always a clear-cut line that there's a distinct difference between talking and coaching. Anyone can sit on the side and
Mm.
talk and joystick a child through the game. We keep on going back to the concept of feedback, and feedback is observation. If you could write your feedback out a week ahead of time and just said, on the second week of the game, this is exactly what I'm going to tell the players,
Yeah.
regardless of what's happening in the game,
Right.
then you're not necessarily fixing anything. You just have a narrative that you want to stick to, but your narrative doesn't always align with the experience. So if we could help create that narrative based on what's actually occurring, the players are going to benefit more from it. And we actually become better coaches because we work on the art of
Yeah.
observation, which, Mike, you just alluded to, that
Yeah.
it's not easy to sit there quietly when things are not going well and allow the players a moment to solve it on their own.
Right. Right. That's the key thing.
Mhm.
If you can get over that, then actually you have more space to observe, because you got to do something to earn your name as a coach. You got to be doing something, and being able to observe during a game or last 20 minutes of practice. Let the team play. Don't interfere. Let them do it. I think when we're designing this app called CoachFives, this platform, one is we wanted to help coaches be able to understand the game so they kind of know what to look for. So a lot of coaches will go to the game, have no idea what am I looking for. So part of it is to have some coach education around how to see the game. And going back to a point you made, but how to keep it simple. The game does not need to be complex. So if you can do that, then you make observations. So in our application, we have then an easy way to capture those observations. So particularly if you're doing them in a game or you're busy, I have coach friends who have notebooks and they scribble things down, whatever. So we're trying to make that a little bit more streamlined and useful for the coach. Then the key thing, as we both talked about, is how you take those observations and turn them into bite-sized, useful, one-on-one conversations that have a little impact. They don't have to be huge, but it's that little nudge. And if you keep doing those consistently through the season, then those players learn. And I love your point about, you made the point about the importance of players being able to talk to players and
Mhm.
solving it. I'm thinking when the coach models that, has his couple of minutes with you, he's modeling a way of having a conversation that that player can carry on when you say, okay, talk about that. Because now yes, you ask a question, we come up with a solution, we go back and forward, we all high five and we come away feeling like we can do this. And I think that's the, if you like, the model in CoachFives in the app is feedback conversations are simple. They always start with a question. Maybe ask the player how they're feeling, not just what they saw, because actually that can come out, very strongly. Always give them a well done. Always look for, a lot of coaches, I think, look for what we're doing wrong. And that's the starting point. Instead of looking at what we're doing well and making sure you say that, and then there's that little nudge, is that kind of 1, 2, 3, 2-3 minutes individually. I think iteratively over the course of the season, if you can manage that, then that's going to make a difference, not just to each individual, but it's going to create a better team. So that connection from individual to team, I think, is a really interesting one and an important one for coaches to think about. So, yeah, so that's what we find is coaches find that hard to manage. They're busy, they have a lot of stuff on, got 12 players. How do I follow all that? And I think that's where technology can help. You don't have to do that. You can make, everybody has their own way of doing that. But we found a lot of coaches have looked at this and say, yeah, that helps. So CoachFives can help me manage that and understand that. And that would be, the next step. So, yeah,
Yeah.
Alf.
Well, Mike, you mentioned, we're talking a little bit now about tech and this app, CoachFives that we've been working on now for the better part of the last 9 or 12 months. And but fundamentally, right, coaching is a human endeavor. I mean, I like to say, it's an analog experience. So we're seeing a lot of tech show up in the youth game now. A lot of that is, kind of being retooled from the professional game, and we're starting to see it show up more in the grassroots. And I think, there's certainly a place for it. But Mike, Tommy, how do you kind of look at this space around, tech and the fundamentally analog experience of coaching, the fundamentally interpersonal experience of coaching? And, how are you seeing it show up at the grassroots? And how do you see coaches at this level, kind of maybe orienting, or any advice for coaches at this level to, for orienting around, the tech that's starting to show up in this space?
Well, if I put it into perspective, and most people who know me in technology, I'm one of the people who would like to have a rotary cell phone. So I'm I'm not I don't always go out to seek technology just for the sake of seeking technology.
Yes,
But when
yes.
you look at what it can provide, it's undeniable. Is it makes more often than not, it makes life easier than trying to do it with a pen and paper. You can always do it with a pen and paper, but if you could have something that makes it a little bit easier so you could turn your focus on to something better, and it is a reasonable expense, if you will, then it's hard to replace technology in the modern game.
Yeah, it's we look at this issue as certainly tech is not a replacement for good coaching. Any good tech that's showing up in the youth game needs to be able to support the coach and not replace the coach. And you said it, I think, a little more elegantly, than I did just there. You know, tech can be a time saver. It can actually gonna help with your own memory, right? Like you're having all these observations throughout a season. You're talking to the players, but maybe can you remember the conversation you had with player in week 1 if we're now in week 6 of the season?
Yeah.
So that is where I think there is a role for tech, but again, kind of right sizing it and making it the right tool at the right moment for coaches and for players alike. But yeah, Mike, your take on this and how you see it.
Yeah, I think it's fundamentally for us, and who've been through soccer all our whole lives, or any sport. It's a human endeavor. It's an emotional endeavor. It's a social endeavor. It's human, and it needs to stay that way. Otherwise, you lose what is the core value of sport. One of the challenges with tech, it tends to be a tsunami. It can take over the sport. You see that in the pro game and all the media tech and all the analytics and everything flashing on the screen or whatever, is just so we don't forget that this is, particularly in the youth game, this is about kids pulling on a jersey, which immediately makes them both proud and nervous as hell, and going out on the field and doing their best and pretending to be Yamal or whatever. That's what kids want. That's what kids want to do. That's the value. And that's how it has to stay, and we find that balance where tech can help on the logistics side, can help simplify things. That's what we're trying to create. So I'll end it with our promo is we have a V1 of CoachFives there. Is designed to help coaches. Any coach can trial it for free. And we have coach education modules that we're developing, and hopefully we'll work with Tommy and the MYSA to bring more of this insight into how we can create better connections between coach and player, and how that can benefit the game and how that can benefit the coaches who invest their thinking in this. And I'll finish with that.
All right, perfect, Mike. Thank you. Yeah, wonderful summary. And yeah, Tommy, thanks for your time today. I always appreciate getting to sit down with you and just have a conversation about the youth game. Your perspective, knowledge, experience is absolutely invaluable, and just appreciate what you bring to the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any just final thoughts yourself before we wrap it up?
The only final thought was, and it goes back to what we were talking about before, it is as a coach, don't be afraid to be vulnerable. There are times that
Mhm.
you don't always have to have the answer. You just have to have the patience to be vulnerable enough to acknowledge that and try to come up with solutions together. And sometimes a 10-year-old or a 9-year-old, listening to them can actually help you solve it.
You do it.
Be
Yeah.
patient, go forward, and enjoy the journey with your players.
Oh, perfectly
Yeah.
said, Tommy. I can't
Thanks
say it
so
better
much.
than that. Great. Well, thanks to both of you for your time today. Excellent conversation,
Yeah.
and
Thanks, Al.
yeah, would love to do
Thank
this
you
again
all.
sometime. All right, thanks, guys.